For 40 days, the bombs fell. Then, with less than an hour to spare before the President of the United States was prepared to plunge 88 million people into darkness, a phone call from Pakistan stopped the clock. The war isn't over, but as of 8 p.m. Eastern last night, it paused. And this morning, the world is trying to figure out what just happened and whether it...
So we're now learning President Trump's threat against Iranian energy hub pushed the regime leaders to make a ceasefire deal with the United States. But the 2-week ceasefire hold will only last as long as Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz.
Responding to reports of potential in-person talks in Pakistan coming up this Friday in 2 days, the White House press secretary said there are discussions about in-person talks, but nothing is final until announced by the president or the White House.
So will it have any bearing on the president's scheduled meeting today with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte? Let's bring in Mark Dubowitz, former advisor on Iran policy to the Biden, Trump, Obama, and Bush administrations. Mark, good morning. And I want to get to the ceasefire and how this all came about. But let me just ask you quickly about that NATO piece. This is going to be an interesting and possibly heated meeting between two friends with Rutte because NATO has not been there for us.
Yeah, a meeting between two very good friends, but I think the president is right to be very disappointed with NATO and its lack of contribution to this effort. I mean, we discovered in this war, we do have very strong allies, Israel, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Ukraine, but unfortunately most European leaders were not there for us, and we're critical, and certainly we're not contributing much.
Yeah, Mark, you advised so many presidents, President Biden, obviously President Trump, Obama, and President Bush. So what was happening behind the scenes? And when you look at that 10-point plan, where do we go? We can't agree to all of that. So what happens over the next 2 weeks? How do we come to a compromise?
Well, the fundamental difference with all those presidents is that after 15 months of having President Trump in office, Iran has never been weaker in its 47-year history. I mean, the amount of damage done to the regime under President Trump is remarkable. So he's coming in with maximum leverage and 15 very clear demands from the Iranians. I think it's very unlikely President Trump would ever agree to the ridiculous demands that the Iranians have put forward. So we're going to be looking for a deal that strips Iran of its war-making capabilities, its nuclear capabilities, and puts it in a position where it can't threaten its neighbors or the United States.
Mark, I'm curious, the president has earned a lot of goodwill from the American public and how he handles conflicts. But looking at the point plan, there's such a separation between what the United States wants and what Iran's stated goal is. They want us gone. They want Israel gone as well. Is there any case where the people that are currently running Iran agrees to some sort of proposal of long-lasting peace?
Well, there's certainly a planetary difference between the U.S. demands and the Iranian demands. But I think the regime is now facing the prospect of complete elimination. I mean, when you look at the obituary list of this regime, the number of senior commanders and leaders, including this former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, that have been eliminated by the combined forces of the United States and Israel. This regime has got to know they have a choice, a deal with President Trump, or they are going to end up on the ash heap of history.
And Mark, so is it different this time, aside from the non-starter list of demands by Iran? We're getting these reports in Axios and elsewhere that there was communication, there was a desire on this new regime. Mojtaba Khamenei, even in hiding, was communicating. Vice President Vance was playing a role, even from Hungary, in talks. Is there a sign that it's different this time, that this new regime does actually want to do something that Iran has never wanted to do, which is to negotiate in actual good faith?
I doubt that they'll negotiate in good faith. I think they are committed to resistance at all costs. But if the new people that have taken the place of the men that have been eliminated over and over again want to stay alive, they've got to understand that there has to be some kind of deal. And the real question is, what are they willing to concede on? They've got to concede on their nuclear program, on their ballistic missile program, on their support for terrorism. And President Trump did not come into office and will not leave office with this regime in charge of the Strait of Hormuz, and this regime with deadly capabilities that can threaten the United States and our allies.
All right, and we'll see what happens with this meeting with NATO today. Will we pull out of NATO? Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Will hold. Here is what we know, what we don't, and what no one on this morning's Fox News segment was willing to say. President Trump said he agreed to suspend planned attacks on Iranian infrastructure for 2 weeks, backing off his shocking threats to imminently order the destruction of Iran's whole civilization. The move was based on conversations with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir of Pakistan. The terms, as stated by Trump, subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks, Iran confirmed. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said, "If attacks against Iran are halted, our powerful armed forces will cease their defensive operations. For a period of 2 weeks, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible via coordination with Iran's armed forces." The U.S. and Iran are expected to hold peace talks on Friday in Islamabad. Vice President Vance is likely to lead the U.S. delegation. Markets exhaled. Oil prices plunged as much as 16% following the announcement. CNBC, the S&P 500 surged 2.3%. The Dow spiked 1,200 points. The deal is already breaking before the ink dried, before there was even ink. The ceasefire began to crack. Iran suspended traffic through the Strait of Hormuz hours after allowing 2 tankers to pass, citing Israel's fresh strikes on Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu denied that any ceasefire was in place in Lebanon, contradicting Pakistan's Prime Minister, who said the ceasefire would apply everywhere. Several Gulf Arab countries reported attacks continuing after the ceasefire took effect. Lebanon came under intense bombardment, with Lebanon's health ministry reporting hundreds killed or wounded in new strikes. So within 12 hours of the ceasefire announcement, the strait has been reopened and reclosed. Lebanon is being bombed harder than before. Iran and the U.S. disagree on what's covered, and Israel is treating the agreement as applicable only to Iran proper. This is not peace. This is a pause with an asterisk. Both sides are claiming victory. Both are lying. Trump's version: we have already met and exceeded all military objectives. He called it a big day for world peace and said big money will be made. Iran's version: Iran's Supreme National Security Council confirmed the agreement and claimed nearly all war objectives have been achieved. Their stated 10-point plan includes demands for the withdrawal of all U.S. combat forces from the region, the lifting of all sanctions, controlled Iranian passage of the strait, and full war damages payments. Trump has already rejected reports about the contents of Iran's 10-point plan, saying the only meaningful points are the ones the U.S. will discuss behind closed doors. Translation: both sides signed a ceasefire while interpreting it to mean completely different things. Iran thinks it just won sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz and an American withdrawal from the region. Trump thinks he just got Iran to capitulate. The actual text, if there is one, apparently says neither. What the Fox segment got right. Mark Dubowitz, the former Iran policy advisor to 4 administrations, made 3 observations that cut through the noise. First, he said Iran is weaker than at any point in its 47-year history, and Trump holds maximum leverage. That's largely accurate. Iran's military has been devastated, its leadership decapitated, its economy in ruins. Second, and this is the crucial point the hosts didn't press, he said, I doubt that they will negotiate in good faith. They are committed to resistance at all cost. If that's true, then the next 2 weeks aren't a path to peace. They're a breather before the next escalation. Third, he identified the real question. What are they willing to concede on? The answer, based on Iran's published demands, appears to be almost nothing of substance. They want sanctions lifted, forces withdrawn, the strait under their control, and damages paid. That is not a concession list. That is a victory declaration. What the Fox segment missed. The ceasefire is already collapsing over Lebanon. This is not a footnote. Israel renewed strikes on southern Lebanon hours after the ceasefire, with state media reporting the heaviest bombardment yet. More than 1 million displaced Lebanese who had prepared to return home were told by authorities to stay put. If Iran decides that Israeli strikes on Hezbollah violate the spirit of the ceasefire, the strait closes again, and we're back to where we were at 7:59 p.m. last night, except with no remaining credibility for anyone's deadlines. The cost of this war, 40 days, more than 1,900 killed in Iran by the government's own count, a figure that hasn't been updated in days and is certainly higher. More than 1,400 killed in Lebanon, 23 dead in Israel, 13 U.S. service members killed, 11 Israeli soldiers killed in Lebanon, a downed fighter jet, a kidnapped journalist, Shelley Kittleson, has been released, the State Department confirmed Tuesday. More than 20,000 seafarers stranded at sea. Gas above $4, universities bombed, a synagogue in Tehran destroyed, children in human chains around power plants, a president who said a whole civilization could die tonight. That is the cost of arriving at a 2-week pause whose terms both sides already interpret differently, whose geographic scope is already contested, and whose Strait of Hormuz provisions were suspended within hours. The Golden Age fantasy. Trump posted this morning, this could be the golden age of the Middle East. He said Iran can start the reconstruction process, and that big money will be made. Reconstruction of what? The country the United States has been bombing for 40 days? With whose money? Under whose authority? The regime whose leaders have been systematically assassinated? The parliament speaker who is simultaneously the man Trump's negotiating with and the man threatening to burn American soldiers alive? No one on Fox News asked these questions this morning. They were too busy celebrating leverage. Friday. Talks in Islamabad. Vance leads the U.S. delegation. The gap between the two sides' positions is, in Dubowitz's own word, planetary. Iran wants all sanctions lifted, all U.S. forces out, straight sovereignty, damages paid, resistance access protected. The U.S. wants nuclear program dismantled, missile program destroyed, proxy support ended, strait fully open under international law, regime never threatens neighbors again. Finding middle ground between those positions in 14 days would be the greatest diplomatic achievement since the end of the Cold War. Finding it between two governments that have been trying to kill each other's leaders for the past 6 weeks would be something beyond that. Robert Geist Pinfold, a political analyst and lecturer in international security at King's College London, said the ceasefire remains very uncertain in scope and implementation, and noted that everyone, as usual, is claiming victory, and there are still continued violations. The Director General of the International Air Transport Association said it will take months for fuel supplies and prices to normalize, even if the strait remains open. I don't think it's going to happen in weeks. Last night at 7:59 p.m., the world was 1 minute from a president ordering the destruction of an entire nation's electrical grid. At 8:01, he announced a ceasefire.